Alright, so in the last two videos, we did the starting items, the boots, the juices, as well as the legendary items, and now we're going to finish off all of the item tier lists with the mythics. Now, I'm going to say I'm not the most confident with a lot of these ratings. It is kind of hard to tell, and at the end of the day, they are, of course, my opinions. So if you guys have any thoughts, please let me know in the comments below, as I will definitely be missing certain things. But without further ado, let's get right into it, and we're going to start off with Crown of the Shattered Queen. Now, like I have done with all of my previous tier lists, I have actually already made the tier list, and I'm going to reference that on this side, and I have compared the mythics in Arena to what they are like in the normal state of the game. So that is kind of important because Crown of the Shattered Queen in the base game I think is only like 2,800 or 2,600. And in this game, every item is 3,000 gold, so you have to buff the stats in order to compensate that a little bit. And Crown of the Shattered Queen, for instance, has 100 ability power, while in the base game, I believe it only has 70 ability power, which is a pretty insane buff if you think about it. I mean, just 30 extra ability power, not bad at all. In the previous videos, I always talk about how mages are a bit weak, and I think a lot of that stems from their items just not being that insane, as well as them struggling to, like, kill people with them being more tanky and stuff like that. And so while Crown of the Shattered Queen has 100 ability power, it's not actually that crazy. What the item does is that it gives you a shield at the beginning of the round, which reduces incoming damage by 75%. Which will then fall off whenever you do take damage, so getting hit by a random poke spell really sucks when you have Crown. So this item is really good against like short range champions with a lot of burst, as the Crown giving you 75% damage reduction for 1.5 seconds is really good at making sure you don't get comboed down. While you do have that shield, you also are gaining extra ability power. So at the beginning it's only 10 ability power, but up to level 18 it becomes 40 ability power, which means that this item is actually giving you 140 ability power if you're level 18, which again is pretty ridiculous. And then we have the Mythic passive, which we have to talk about, which gives all of your legendary items 2.5% movement speed and additional ability power with 8. So this item, I believe, actually gives you like the most possible raw AP, except for, of course, Rabadon's Death Cap, as Rabadon's Death Cap gives you like a percentage of your total AP. But if you just want a ton of raw AP, like as a champion, then Crown of the Shattered Queen, I think, is heavily slept on. It doesn't have like any damage effect inside of the text, which is why they can give so much AP to this item. But I think they actually gave it a ton of potential. If you're playing something like maybe a Syndra Crown could be good. I mean, having a Syndra with a ton of ability power to help her one-shot someone, and then having the safeguard effect so that she herself can't be one-shot, it's not a bad little combo. I'm going to put this item in the decent tier because I genuinely think it's pretty decent. I think it might be like one of the best mage mythics out there. And the fact that it's only a decent tier really shows you that I'm not a huge fan of the AP mythics in general. But that being said, if I am playing an AP champion and I can't use what I would consider the best AP mythic, which you'll be seeing quite shortly, then I usually end up going Crown, actually, and it does feel pretty decent in those scenarios. I will also add that this item gives you 250 health, which isn't anything too crazy, but it is nice to have a little bit more survivability just with raw health, and the mana doesn't really matter in most instances, and the 20 ability haste is also nice, but again, nothing too crazy. The next mythic we have is Luden's Tempest, which also gives you 100 ability power, and then it gives you 9 magic penetration instead of health, gives you that mana, and it gives you 20 ability haste. So this one is much more squishy. You don't get the 75% damage reduction potential from Crown, but it does have an effect where when you damage someone with an ability, you are dealing 100 flat damage plus 10% of your AP, and it also scales with AD if you do have mixed damage. And then that splashes to the target you're going for and 3 nearby enemies. This really only matters if you're playing against someone who has like summons, then that little bit of splash damage is kind of okay. Again, nothing too crazy. It also grants you 15% movement speed when it procs, and when you deal ability damage to champions, it reduces this item's cooldown by 0.5 seconds, up to 3 seconds per spellcast. So you can get it down to like 7 seconds. And yeah, Luden's Tempest is pretty bad. I think the best part about it is that it gives you just the 100 ability power. Flat ability power like that is nice, but if you consider this effect, I mean, you're gaining 100 damage and then 10% AP, so if you have like 1,000 AP, which is a ridiculous number, you're gaining an extra 100 damage, so it'd be doing 200 damage to like 2 people. And that wouldn't even shatter like the health you gain from Crown. So that's nothing too ridiculous. And then the mythic passive you get is 5 magic penetration from all of your items. And I think magic penetration is a bit weak in this mode because everybody has more health just because of the base stats. So pen becomes a little bit less valuable than doing like percent health damage. And it's not like a crazy amount of magic penetration, so if you are playing against people who like see that you are a magic dealing character and they can build some MR, then your magic penetration will lose a lot of value. Honestly, if it wasn't for the 100 ability power, I'd put this item in terrible. I don't really know anybody that you would be building it on, and it's kind of insane just how bad this item really is, in my opinion. Next up, we have an item like Everfrost, which only gives you 70 ability power, so it's giving you 30 less than the other two. And then it's giving you 400 health, which isn't bad, and it's giving you 20 ability haste again, as well as that mana. Active on this item is that you're dealing 100 damage, plus 30% of your AP, plus 50% of your bonus AD. So if you are doing like some weird hybrid build where you do have a lot of AD, then you actually are doing a decent amount of damage, but I don't really see a lot of champions who are building like AD items, except for maybe like Hextech Gunblade. But we'll keep going because it also, if you hit them with it, it slows enemies by 65% for 1 second. But if you hit them at the center of the cone, they are rooted instead. And this item actually just received a buff in this current patch, and it now roots potentially for 1.5 seconds. And yeah, that's okay, I guess. I think the problem with this is if you're playing like a mage, you don't really care about that root. You just kind of want to do as much damage as possible. The Everfrost root is kind of easy to dodge if you just go left or right. You are kind of wanting to hit like ADCs with your magic damage, and Everfrost, they should never be in range of it because it doesn't have the most range. So you can only really like get bruisers or tanks with it, and this item just doesn't do enough damage to those bruisers or tanks. So just the use cases of Everfrost are a bit confusing. I think the buff it received of just increasing the CC by 0.5 seconds doesn't really do anything. I believe this item is just in general pretty terrible. I do like the fact that you do gain 15 ability power for every single legendary you have, but that means you need like 2 legendaries just for it to have the same base AP as these 2 items. And if you consider that, this one would then have like plus 16 AP instead of plus 30, that you would need like another whole item to finally catch up to Crown. But Crown has also that passive where you're getting even more AP. So yeah, you just need a lot of legendaries to catch up to Crown, and I'm pretty sure you never will. It also does deal more damage with the 30% AP. So again, if you have 1,000 AP, which is going to be really hard with Everfrost to reach that level, you would be doing 400 damage with this effect, but it has a 30-second slow, so you're not going to do that like more than once each round. So yeah, I mean, I just think it's pretty weak in general. It's definitely better as the game goes on, but I think you'll just lose the early and mid game too hard for you ever to justify really building this item. Next up, we have Liandry's, which only gives you 70 ability power once again, and it gives you 600 mana and 20 ability haste, so it's not giving you any magic penetration, and it's not giving you any health. And what it does is it lets you deal up to 15% bonus magic damage to champions based on the target's bonus health, maxed at 1250 bonus health. And it also gives you this torment effect where you're dealing damage with abilities, causes enemies to burn for like max health. And yeah, this AP Mythic is definitely the best one. It's the only one I believe that's received nerfs so far. All the other AP Mythics have had to continuously receive buffs. And I'm going to put it still in strong tier. If you are playing an AP champion, you almost always are going to go for Liandry's Anguish, because the only really good AP champions are the ones that can abuse this item. It is quite nice. I don't know, actually, now that I'm reading this, if the bonus health from the arena buffs itself counts as something like for your bonus health, which would make this item a lot better. But this item actually lets mages kill bruisers and tanks, which pretty much none of the other items really lets them do that, as they can go like through multiple rotations of spells and not kill them, while the burn from Liandry's Anguish actually lets them deal with those kind of champions. The passive effect is also not the craziest. It just gives you ability haste, 5 of it for every legendary item, which isn't bad because you just mainly want to spam abilities with Liandry's Anguish just to make sure that it's constantly proccing the effect, as that's where all your damage will be coming from. And this is why I really like Ionian Boots of Lucidity, because that gives you 40 flat CDR, and it pairs really nicely with Liandry's Anguish because that means you can use more abilities on your enemies. This item alone really separates the mage class between champions that are decent and champions that are bad, because if you can build Liandry's Anguish, you're going to be a better champion in the mage class, and if you're forced to build any of the other items, you are definitely going to feel a lot weaker in Arena at the moment. Next we have Rod of Ages, which gives you 70 ability power, 400 health, and 400 mana when you build it, so it actually gives you pretty much the same stats as this item. I'm so bad with names already. Everfrost, yes. So it kind of also shows you how weak Everfrost is, because Rod of Ages will upgrade into a better item after 2 combat rounds, which will then make the item give you 110 ability power, 700 total health, and 700 total mana. So this item is a really good combo with the mana AP item, as you'll be having a ton of mana in general. And then it also has this effect called Eternity, which I've never read in my life. So this will be the first time we are doing that, where you restore mana equal to 7% of pre-medication damage taken from champions, and health equal to 25% of mana spent, up to 20 health per cast per second. For every 200 health or mana restored this way, gain 35% decaying movement speed. Okay, so pretty much you are gaining mana every time you take damage, and you're gaining health when you are spending mana, and it caps at 20 health, so you really want to be like playing a spammy champion for Rod of Ages to be good. And the effect is increased by 50% once you upgrade it, which means that you'll be gaining 30 health per cast, which sounds super duper weak. If you think about it, like every champion has that like up to like 500 extra health, I think, from like the arena buff later on into the game. So you would need like so many casts just to heal up to that point. So yeah, like I expected, the Eternity buff doesn't really do anything. And then the Mythic passive gives you 5 ability haste per legendary item. And I think this item is honestly pretty good. You have to build it first, and you're definitely going to be quite weak, so it is a scaling item. It's almost in the augment dependent tier, because it's really good with the item that gives you like more health based on your total mana. But I don't think it's like too OP with that combo, so I'm not going to put it up here, because the items that are going to be in the augment dependent tier are actually like pretty much OP if you do get certain augments, and Rod of Ages is definitely never OP. In terms of AP items, if I'm playing like a more tanky AP style champion, and I know I can get away with not having to build too much like raw damage, and I just want that little bit of health, then I would build this item. But honestly, I could see it being put a little bit lower. I just think that because it does have some augments that are good with it, like Goliath is another example where you can get 35% more AP, and you can get 35% more health, and just Rod of Ages having the most health for an AP item keeps it still in this decent tier. Next up, we have Night Harvester, which gives you 90 ability power, 400 health, and 25 ability haste. So Night Harvester actually is the item that gives you the most ability haste of all the mage items. I just realized that right now. It gives you a little bit less AP than Luden's and Crown, with like 10 less. And then it has the effect where when you damage a champion, it deals an additional 125 damage plus 15% magic damage, and grants you 25 movement speed for 1.5 seconds. And this item used to have a cooldown of 30 seconds, and they just changed it in this patch, which I'm reading right now, where it goes from 30 seconds to 15 seconds, which seems like a pretty crazy buff, which should tell you how terrible Night Harvester was in the past, where they can justify buffing it by that much. But I still think that 15 seconds does not matter at all. If you have Night Harvester, you're playing a champion that just wants to one-shot someone like a full AP like Elise or like a Fizz or LeBlanc, you're never really going to get 2 procs of Night Harvester off. I mean, think about it, you're doing like a full combo, and then you have to like back off, hope you survive, and then you have to wait like a whole 15 seconds of them not being able to respond in order to get another Night Harvester proc. I just don't think there's enough time for that. And then the proc itself is, I mean, it's kind of whatever. Again, if you have 1,000 AP, that's like 150 plus 125 damage, so 275 damage, which doesn't do anything. Like, you wouldn't even break the health gain from Night Harvester. So if you had like 2 people with Night Harvester hitting each other, they would like get through a little more than half of the Night Harvester health, which is crazy because I'm talking about 1,000 AP. I'm not talking about like a low number of AP. And for a lot of these reasons, I'm going to put this in the bad tier. Originally on my sheet, I have it in the med tier, but this item, I mean, it just doesn't do much. I've built it a couple times on something like Silas, and honestly, I should stop doing that. Actually, I'm going to put it in the med tier. It is definitely better than Luden's because it does have 400 health while Luden's doesn't, and it only has 10 less AP. And Luden's, you also pretty much only get 1 proc, so getting that little bit of extra damage from the Night Harvester proc is better. And you would rather have a little bit extra health than the pen. I mean, all these items of the mage categories are just so bad. they just really feel terrible to build, especially because eventually we'll be going to other items, which are just way worse than these, so hold on, I promise it gets better, but for now, we're in the lower half of the tier list. Now we have Hextech Protobelt, which gives you 90 ability power, 9 magic penetration, 400 health, and 15 ability haste. So of the items that give ability haste, it gives you the least amount. Then it has an effect where you dash in a target direction, and you like unleash an arc of magic missiles, which deal 125 plus 15% magic damage. And then you gain 30% movement speed towards enemy champions. And the mythic passive is you gain more magic penetration for your legendaries. And this item is pretty much only good because it gives you like a extra like kind of flash ability, which is like not as good as flash because the dash is a lot slower than the blink of flash is. It's pretty much like only built on champions like Kennen, Fizz, Akali, Fiddlesticks, champions that like want to get on top of people in order to do their damage. The fact that the cooldown is 40 seconds means you're only going to proc it like once per fight. This item is a lot better with the augment where it reduces all of your item cooldowns, and that same thing actually applies to these 3 items. But at the same time, the damage is always so low and the effects are nothing too crazy that it still doesn't feel good. As like I was playing Shaco, for instance, with Luden's, and I got so many Luden's procs off, but it still would have been way better for me to build Morello's because like 10 Luden's procs on a tank with MR does absolutely nothing. It just doesn't do any damage for this game mode. I think pretty much they should just buff all of the raw numbers on these items so that they can be more playable. That being said, I'm going to put Hextech Rocket Belt in the med tier. It's alright. It's mostly used just for like an extra flash. I mean, champions that I listed just do so much damage that you just kind of need to be on top of them in order to succeed. So it does serve that purpose, but it's still pretty underwhelming compared to all of the other items. Next up, we have Riftmaker, which is a pretty interesting item, and it gives you 70 ability power, it gives you 300 health, gives you 15 ability haste, and it gives you 7% Omnivamp, and Omnivamp is a pretty rare stat, so it's cool to see. And then it has this effect, which for each second in combat with enemy champions, you deal 3% bonus damage, up to a maximum of 9%, and at maximum strength, the bonus damage is dealt as true damage instead. And then the Mythic passive, it grants all of their legendary items 2% Omnivamp and 8 ability power. Omnivamp is like, it's like decent, but the problem with it is that the fights in Arena that I've experienced are usually like really fast or really slow. It's like not really any in between. If you're playing like against Omega tanks, then the fights will be a bit longer. And so that's like kind of the problem with Omnivamp, because against those mega tanks, you want to go Leandry's Anguish, as you usually won't be able to out sustain them from my experience, especially because they can build like anti-heal pretty easily, usually just like going Thornmail or something like that. And yes, sure, Thornmail is an armor item, but I mean, if you are double AP, then they can just build a ton of MR and pretty much just completely ignore you and kill you with Sunfire. Again, I'm not really sure who is building Riftmaker. I could see like cases for Vladimir, for Silas, for Swain, for like Akali, for Kale, but all those champions just pretty much have better mythics. The fact that it only gives you 70 flat ability power is not great. I mean, these items just give you way more ability power. Sure, it gives you 8 ability power, but so does Crown, so Crown will just always give you way more ability power. I think for most mage champions to succeed, you want to like pretty much just one-shot people or just burn them to death with Leandries while you're running away, and Riftmaker encourages you to like be in an extended fight. And the whole 9% extra damage that you're dealing, and it goes to true damage, it's like alright, but like there's not really any champion that's doing insane amounts of damage that would benefit from this. Like your assassins just want to do all of their damage really quickly, so like by the time they get this extra 9%, they've already used all of their abilities, and then they don't actually benefit from the 9% extra damage. So this one's probably best on Swain, but I think Swain just has better options in general, like pretty much just going Leandries, as that's just the best AP item in my opinion. I'm going to put it in the bad tier. It's pretty close to being terrible, because again, I don't really see anybody who is building this in the fights that I'm playing. In Arena, you pretty much just want to like one-shot people or be super duper tanky so that you can't be one-shot. Riftmaker doesn't really help you do either, because the game has these augments which just make people either really tanky or do way more damage. The whole like dream of trying to out-sustain people is a bit of a struggle. If there was no augments, then Riftmaker would be absolutely insane in Arena. It would be so good. But because everybody's just doing way more damage, sustain actually becomes a lot weaker in the late game. Riftmaker will definitely be a pretty good item in the early to mid game, but it's going to fall off quite rapidly. Next up we have Shurilia's Battlesong, which is another really cheap mythic in the base game, and so they have to buff a lot of the stats. I'm pretty sure if anything is yellow, that means it's an adjusted stat from the base game. What it does, it gives you 45 ability power, 500 health, 40 ability haste, which is a lot, and 100% base mana regen. And then the active on this is it grants nearby allies 99% movement speed for 4 seconds, which is pretty ridiculous actually. And it also makes it that whenever you empower or protect another ally champion, it grants both you and them 20% movement speed. And the mythic passive is it grants all other legendary items 5 ability haste. And this item's not like anything special. You pretty much have better options if you are playing like anybody that would want this item, and by better options, it's going to be the next one in Moonstone. I actually really like Shurilia's Battlesong, especially if you get the augment, which lowers CDRs, because 99% movement speed is no joke. If you are actually just struggling to catch up to people, then this item could be a sneaky buy for you if you just know you can like one-shot people pretty safely. Like if you're playing something like a Garen that has like perfect crit augments or something like that, then Shurilia's Battlesong on your partner could actually be a sneaky good item, because a Garen spinning with extra 99% movement speed is quite a scary thing. But you need very specific cases for Shurilia Battlesong to be actually playable, and even in those cases, I don't think it's too OP, so it just doesn't have enough use cases for it to be anything but honestly kind of bad. But it makes perfect sense. Like, this item is good for roaming, for like catching people off guard, and Arena really isn't about that, so I'm fine that this item isn't anything too crazy. And I like the fact that they gave you 99% movement speed, because that is a ton, so at least it has some use cases. Next we have Moonstone Renewer, which gives you 45 ability power, 200 health, 30 ability haste, and 100% base mana regen. Then it has this effect where healing or shielding yourself or an ally changes the other champion, healing them or shielding them for the based on the original amount. And I didn't say the numbers because these have changed since I got this footage. Alright, I'm finding it here. So Moonstone actually was changed from 40% of your healing to 30%, and the shield was changed from 45% to 35%. And this item is still quite strong. Before the changes, this item was very, very OP. There was just so many interactions you could abuse, like Moonstone Renewer plus Gargoyle Stoneplate, which was just absolutely bonkers. And this item is still definitely strong. It's not OP because the base stats are honestly kind of terrible. 200 health isn't anything really special. If you think about it, like the other AP mage items are giving oftentimes 400 health, which is just a lot better. The 30 ability haste is nice, but again, nothing too crazy. The mythic effect, which grants all other legendary items 5 heal and shield power, isn't bad as well, but again, nothing too crazy. Still, just the fact that when you heal your teammate, you are also healing yourself, and when you shield them, you're also shielding yourself, or vice versa. If you're shielding yourself, you're shielding your ally, which is why Gargoyle Stoneplate was absolutely ridiculous, and I still think it is decent, but not nearly as crazy. I think this item is kind of weird because I don't fully know how it works on someone like Sona, because Sona usually is healing and shielding both herself and her ally. So, like, when she presses W, she's healing herself and she's healing her ally, like I just said. So does her ally get like 140% of the heal because you get the original 100% and then like 40% of what Sona's getting, and same with the shield. Well, now it'd be 130%. I think that's how it works, which is why this item is so ridiculous, why it was so broken on Taric for the longest time, just because like the amount that you can heal and shield people is absolutely bonkers. So what they have done is they've also nerfed a lot of the champions that can abuse Moonstone, but I still think champions like Sona and Soraka could be pretty decent. It does struggle against things that just one-shot you, which is, again, why it's not an OP tier, but if you can survive any insane amount of burst, then Moonstone Renewer will oftentimes help you heal someone back to complete full health, so it is still definitely very strong. Next up, we have Echoes of Helia, which gives you 30 ability power, 200 health, 30 ability haste, and 125% base mana regen. Then it has this effect called Soul Siphon, where damaging a champion grants a soul shard up to a maximum of 2, and healing or shielding an ally consumes all soul shards and restores 20 to 80 ally health, depending on level, and deals 30 to 180 ally magic damage per shard to the nearest enemy champion. It has another effect called Dissonance, which gains 3 ability power per 25% base mana regeneration, and it disables Harmony. And I think Harmony is like an effect where you gain extra heal and shield power based on your mana regeneration. I'm not actually 100% sure. And then the mythic passive is it grants all other legendary items 5 ability haste. Now these numbers are outdated. It is a lot higher now, but my lord, when the numbers were this low, it was probably the worst item in the entire game by far. I mean, just look at it. Like, at level 18, you're healing someone 80 health, which when people are gaining, like, up to, like, I've seen easily 10,000 health. Could you imagine just carrying about 80 health from your teammate, or dealing, like, 180 damage to somebody who has a bunch of health? Just because everybody has way more health in this game because of the way they did the buffs. Flat numbers like these just need to be way higher for them to actually matter. You also need to be damaging a champion to gain these soul shards, and enchanters aren't really poking people too often. They're usually focusing way more on just trying to survive and not get one shot than like autoing them, especially in the late game. Like, could you imagine with your low attack speed trying to weave in autos in order to gain this little bit of health or damage? So yeah, I'm looking at it right now. They literally doubled the effect of it, so it's now 40 to 160, and the damage is 45 to 270, which is definitely a lot better. But again, like, you're probably getting maybe 3 procs of this maximum in a fight, so that's like, what, 400, like 600 damage from your enchanter, and like 300, I don't know, it's some amount of health, like maybe like 500 health, and I don't know if it scales based on your heal power. Probably does. this item, just in general, I mean, it's so bad. I think it's pretty bad in the base game now as well, especially that they got rid of the like Ash interaction with Font of Life. So I don't really see it. If like you aren't building this item in normal League of Legends, why on earth would you build it in Arena when the items matter way more? Because it's a 2v2, so everything you do actually has so much weight. If you see your teammate building Echoes of Helia, you are in a rough time. And because I just thought of that, yeah, I'm going to put it in terrible tier. It might still be the worst item in the game in terms of mythics. Like, why on earth would you ever build it when you could go Moonstone, where your healing and shielding just becomes absolutely insane? So it just becomes way more valuable to have the extra healing power from this item instead of having this really crappy effect that they had to already double in power, and still I've never seen this item be built. I just realized the way they sorted the items when I made this little recording to get the information from the items is that they had all of the items like with AP first, and so now we're finally getting to the items that have a bit of AD, and the last item that has AP, I'm gonna double check, yep, is Rageblade, which has 25 attack damage, 25 ability power, and 30% attack speed. And then it has the effect where attacks apply 30 magic damage on hit, and your critical strike chance is converted into additional damage, up to 150 more. I don't know the math on this number. My apologies, there's a lot of like hidden math, but it sounds decent. Then you have Seething Strike, where your basic attacks grant 8% attack speed, stacking up to 4 times, for a maximum of 32% attack speed. So if you auto someone 4 times, you're gaining 62% attack speed from this item. And while fully stacked, every third attack applies your on-hit effects twice, which is pretty nutty because on-hit effects are quite strong. And in this game, every single champion has that on-hit effect where you're doing like 1% of current health target damage to people. It might be 1.5%. I don't actually fully remember. It's hard to keep track of everything. And the fact that there is no attack speed cap makes the 62% attack speed pretty ridiculous. If you think about like the boots giving you 40% attack speed, and then the starting item, Guardian's Hammer, giving you another 25% attack speed, that's 65% attack speed. And then with this item, you're getting like 130-ish% attack speed, which is just a ton of attack speed. So any champion with on-hit damage is absolutely bonkers because of that little combo. And that's why we're seeing all of the champions that use Rageblade get nerfed over and over and over again. We have Kaisa, we have Kog'Maw, we have Kayle, we have Vayne. They all build Rageblade, they all use it really well, they all get nerfed a ton of times, but Rageblade is not really getting hit. I think it got like hit maybe once, but the item is still pretty bonkers. I think that any other champion that could use Rageblade quite well could be sneaky strong. Like we have our Varus sitting there. I think he is a bit underrated. He doesn't have the mobility or like the Kayle ult to keep herself safe, or just Kog'Maw doing like a billion damage, like I just said. So he isn't as good as them, but he does have his W to proc the on-hit damage. And the fact that it gives you AD and AP is quite nice, especially because all the champions I have named scale both with AP and AD. And also like the legendary items that they would build also all scale with like AP or AD usually, so it just becomes like this huge wombo combo of power and strength. And the mythic passive you get is it grants all other legendary items 5% armor penetration and 6% magic penetration, which again is pretty bonkers. I've never really realized just how strong that is. So let's say you build this item first, you're already getting 5% armor pen and 6% magic penetration. You build another legendary item, you now have 10% armor penetration, 12% magic penetration. At full build, you'll have 5 items, right? So you're getting 25% armor pen and 30% magic penetration, which when I look at an item like Mortal Reminder, it gives you 30%, so you're only gaining 5% less armor pen than that item, which is pretty crazy. And then Void Staff gives you 40% magic pen, which, I mean, this item is giving you 30% magic pen, which is pretty ridiculous just as like a little bit of mythic passive. And a lot of the champions I named, like I just said, benefit both from the armor pen and the magic pen, as they are doing a ton of mixed damage. I mean, this item is just like, this item is absolutely insane. I think this item pretty much makes it weird that there are so many ranged buffs, because they use that quite effectively, and then they use Rageblade really effectively. I think it's kind of funny that they are just nerfing all the champions that use Rageblade really well, but they're not nerfing Rageblade like too much. I think it's because the numbers on it are pretty low, like 25 AD, 25 AP. That's not a lot. I mean, the stats of the item are pretty terrible, but it's just still such a strong item even despite that. I think they don't really know how to nerf it, maybe, because I think people would make fun of the item if it only had like 10 AD, 10 AP, but maybe you just have to look at the effects, maybe even just like the mythic passive, just tune that down a little bit. This is also like why when you are building like pretty tanky, you don't really feel that tanky, because you are getting a lot of the numbers shredded just by this little mythic passive. This item's just ridiculous. I mean, no attack speed cap, all the on-hit items scale with both AP, AD. This item gives you that. There's a lot of like crit augments, so you can get to this 150 pretty, maybe like easily. I'm not really sure, again, what the math is on that. Yeah, just in general, this item, absolutely bonkers. Don't really know what they can do about it. Probably find ways to nerf it. It's kind of getting to the point where it's funny how much they've nerfed the champions that abuse this item while letting the item just exist. Maybe it needs to be looked at, and then maybe you can even find a world where you buff the other champions back a little bit. But until this item stops being king, I just think that those champions do need to be nerfed to the utter ground, because my lord, just the combo you get with this is insane. Next up, we have Yumu's Ghostblade, which gives you 65 AD, 21 Lethality, and 20 Ability Haste. Then it has the active called Rate Step, where you gain movement speed and ghosting for 6 seconds, which lets you walk through like minions, which doesn't have too much effect unless people have like, I guess, like summons. And during this time, your spooky stacks are set to the maximum and cannot decrease. It's kind of funny that they call the spectral shards spooky stacks here, because they don't mention spooky stacks anywhere here. But you do gain these things called spectral shards while moving, and you get like 40 movement speed when you have maximum spectral shards. And while you are at max shards, you gain more lethality. And then shards will reset 3 seconds after dealing damage to an enemy champion. And then the mythic passive grants all other legendary items 12 attack damage, which is pretty insane if you think about it. Like, if you have 5 items, this would give you 60 additional attack damage, so you're getting like 125 attack damage. That's actually something to maybe consider if you have a champion that has like really insane AD scaling. Maybe then you could build Yumu's Ghostblade. I just think the effect of it isn't really good. I've already talked so many times about how I think Pen is a bit weak in this game mode, where everybody is just really tanky in general. The Yumu's Ghostblade effect is usually pretty good for like roaming around the map, but this one you don't really care about roaming on the map. So I'm going to put it in terrible tier, especially because the other lethality mythics are just way better. So there's very few instances where you would ever want to build Yumu's Ghostblade, except for maybe if you are trying to do like a one-shot like Caitlyn strategy. Maybe then I could actually see it being useful, and something I should explore a little bit more, with the item giving you this 12 attack damage for every legendary item you have. But if you don't end up like one-shotting someone who's squishy, then the item itself doesn't really do anything for you. Next up, we have Duskblade, and it gives you 60 AD, 21 lethality, and 20 ability haste. Now, I thought I saw that this item was either getting buffed or nerfed in a patch, but I can't seem to find it in 13.14, 1.5, or 1.6, so I don't know if this is the most updated one. But what this item does, its effect is your abilities deal up to an additional 25% if you're melee, or 15% if you're ranged damage based on the target's missing health. And when a champion that you have damage within the last 3 seconds dies, you become intangible for 1.5 seconds, so you can't be like clicked. And the mythic passive is it grants all other legendary items 7 ability haste and 5 movement speed. And the fact that your abilities are doing additional damage is really nice. if you're playing like a lethality champion that really relies on their abilities to deal their damage. A lot of people that I've interacted with in my like comments really like Duskblade. Maybe I'm sleeping on the item a little bit. I think the fact that the Mythic passive doesn't give you any AD actually makes me kind of want to rate it lower. Maybe actually rate this item a little bit higher. Just getting ability haste is nice because you want to be like spamming your abilities if you are using Duskblade. But I think this item does struggle a bit in like killing really tanky people, which isn't great, and it's decent at like one-shotting squishies, that's for sure. I kind of wonder, like, let's say if someone is at full health, how much additional damage are you dealing? Because if it's like 10% always, then that would be pretty ridiculous. I'm gonna put this item in the meh tier. I think it's pretty alright in general. The stats on it are nothing too crazy though. The Mythic passive is nothing too crazy, so it really just depends on how strong this Night Stalker effect is. Every time I've looked at the item itself, I've not been like too impressed with it. The intangible is also nice because you actually do care about it a little bit, because oftentimes you're like going in really heavily on one person, hoping to pop them, and then it's kind of harder for the enemy team to get that return kill to trade 1-for-1 if you do hit that intangible. But if you don't successfully kill them, then that doesn't have any effect at all. So this item is definitely a lot better in normal League of Legends because you have the help of your teammates, like more than just one teammate, in order to get the intangible. So I'm going to stick it in meh tier. This one I've definitely built before. It's never been anything too crazy, and I just think that the next lethality item is a lot better. But I definitely could be wrong about Duskblade. I could see it being a little bit higher, but I don't think it's in Strong or OP tier. Next we have Eclipse, and this item is receiving nerfs actually in this current patch, where the AD is going from 60 to 50. The lethality is staying the same at 15, and the ability haste is staying the same at 15. And if you compare it to the stats of Duskblade, it is way less effective, which just shows you that this effect must be absolutely insane, and it really is. What it is when you hit a champion with 2 separate attacks or abilities within 1.5 seconds, you deal an additional % of max health physical damage. I'm looking at the current patch, and it says that they changed the proc % maximum health damage from 8% to 7%, but here it says 6%, so it's actually better in this patch than what I thought, where when you hit people, you are doing 7% max health physical damage if you're melee, or 3% if you are ranged, and you grant yourself 15% movement speed and a shield that's based on your AD, as well as your AP if you have some, and a flat amount. These numbers are quite a lot to look at. You can see though that if you are melee, you are getting way more of a shield. You're getting 240 plus 52% of your bonus AD, while if you're ranged, you're getting 80% of a shield plus 17% of your AD. So it's really a lot better on melee champions than ranged champions. And the Mythic passive is it grants all other legendary items 5% armor penetration and 5 movement speed. You can tell this item is pretty OP because the base stats are just way better than Duskblade and Yumu's. Because, yeah, doing % max health damage is just really, really good, especially because everybody just has way more health in this mode. I always talk about that. This helps AD champions really deal with tanks pretty effectively, because the shield also makes it harder for them to die in return. I think this item is honestly pretty OP. It's just pretty insane to do 7% max health physical damage when everybody just has a lot more max health. The shield itself is pretty nice, especially because you can get a lot of augments which increase your AD, as well as just the items itself have a lot of AD attached to them, so it is a pretty noticeable shield. It's a way to really just like combo and blow people up, and it's definitely pretty meta defining in my opinion. I'm pretty sure that any AD champion would build Eclipse. I don't really see many of them going for anything else. Sometimes you build Duskblade, but that should be a sign that this item is pretty bonkers, because it just gives you the best chance to one-shot somebody, or even just like survive the opportunity to do one more rotation of spells that none of the other items can really give you. So Eclipse definitely in OP tier, makes AD champions pretty ridiculous. If you compare this item to any of the mage items, you can definitely see that like 7% max health is way better than doing that 125 damage, just because the number is way higher. Now, the damage itself isn't too crazy in some scenarios. Like, let's say you're fighting someone who has like 3,000 health, you'd only be doing 210 damage actually. But the cooldown is already a lot lower than these items, and you also gain a shield, so you're just gaining a lot more effect. You're also gaining movement speed, which like these items do give you. But if you are reaching the realm where people are having like 10,000 health, then this item is doing actually 700 damage, which these items will never reach the same peak. So that's why this effect is just way better. So it actually enables lethality users to deal with tanks in some way, or like really heavy bruisers, while the mages just can't really compete against them. Next up, we have Gale Force, which is actually receiving some nice buffs in this current patch. Here it says it does 55 attack damage, and then the attack speed is actually going from 15% to 25%, which is alright. And then you're getting 20% critical strike chance and 7% movement speed. Then it has this effect where you can activate it to dash in a target direction, firing 3 missiles at the lowest health enemy near your destination. Then it deals a total of 150 to 350 damage, which will be based on your level, plus 45% of your bonus physical damage, but as magic damage. And it's increased against low health targets by up to 50%. So the activation of this is actually pretty good as a finisher move. Then the Mythic passive grants all other legendary items 5 attack damage. Now they're also buffing this item by lowering the cooldown from 45 seconds to 30 seconds. But like I always talk about, arena fights usually only last like 40 seconds. So if you are feeling the need to like use Gale Force, you're not gonna really ever get the chance to use it again in most cases. So it's kind of a weird buff to do. It's kind of just like a fake buff to make people like more tempted to build Gale Force, in my opinion, because if you think about it, it really will not do anything. The only time it might come into play is if you get the augment that lowers your cooldowns on items, then maybe that 15 seconds shaved off would be more noticeable. But yeah, that part is a fake buff. The attack speed is nice. I still think this item is pretty lackluster. I'm gonna put it in the bad tier. It's really not that bad, but compared to the other items that like ADCs want to buy, I do think it's still the worst one. The movement speed is okay, but because so many champions have dashes and stuff like that, and Flea already giving you so much movement speed, you don't really need this extra 7%. I mean, it's nice, but it's nothing too crazy. The dash itself, like if you get one shot, the dash doesn't matter at all. Gale Force is better the better you are. Like if you see someone trying to do a combo and you know you could Gale Force away from it, then that's pretty insane. But a lot of times in Arena you'll be like trapped near a wall or like near the zone, and Gale Force then becomes less effective, especially on certain maps like the red one, like Magma Chamber. Gale Force is a lot weaker just because there's a lot of areas where there are a lot of obstacles that you'll just Gale Force into. And the damage is nice as a finisher. It's honestly, I'm gonna bump it up. I'm gonna put it in meh. It's pretty good. I've built it before in like Caitlyn, just because like I know I could auto them from very far away and then use Gale Force to finish them off in like key critical situations. So I do like it for that, but I do think it is weaker in general than the other ADC mythics. Speaking of which, we have Infinity Edge, which gives you 65 attack damage, 20% critical strike chance, and 45% critical strike damage. And then it gives your other legendary items 5 AD, which I think Gale Force did as well. And this one is the first one that's going in augment dependent tier, because if you get Jeweled Gauntlet, Infinity Edge skyrockets in strength. It becomes maybe the strongest augment in the entire game. Oh, I could have also mentioned that another reason why Ginsu's is so good is that there's so many augments that give you like attack speed or like on-hit damage increases. So an item that just makes your on-hits better just becomes way better. Like, the fact this item is just this ridiculously OP compared to everything else is just, it's too humorous. It's almost like you just have to, like, completely change the identity of this item. The fact that it just doubles your on-hits makes those champions just absolutely unbearable sometimes, unless they are Omega nerfed. And yeah, it's like also makes it that if they do hit the great augment combinations, then this item becomes just way better. Okay, I'll try not to talk about Rageblade again. It is aptly named because it does make me rage a lot of the times. But let's get back to Infinity Edge. Infinity Edge with Jeweled Gauntlet is absolutely insane because of this 45% critical strike damage. The way Jeweled Gauntlet works is it lets your abilities critically strike to deal extra damage, and then those critical strikes itself will deal even more damage with Infinity Edge. That's why, like, when you are playing against Lucian, who builds Infinity Edge, and he gets Jeweled Gauntlet, he just absolutely one-shots you, because the ultimate is doing that, like, it is critting, and then it does 45% critical strike damage. Like, Misfortune with JG and Infinity Edge is insane. Just champions like that in general. I think without Jeweled Gauntlet, this does become a lot weaker. It's still not bad per se, but it doesn't have like any effects, and you can't really one-shot people in general. They also did increase crit damage in this game several times to try and make it more appetizing, but because you don't get any attack speed on Infinity Edge, it does become a bit problematic to buy. You just aren't autoing that often compared to champions that build Rageblade, because there's also no like attack speed cap. So getting a bunch of attack speed is really good, and not getting any attack speed from Infinity Edge just kind of sucks. Another reason why you want a lot of attack speed is because you want to kite people really effectively, and the more attack speed you have, the easier it is to kite, the more effective you can kite. Like when you're watching the space gliding Twitches, for example, they have a ton of attack speed with their Lulu combination. Same with Kog'Maw, and that's because you can just like click and attack really quickly. But Infinity Edge, you can't do that, so you have to like really emphasize like your autos, if that makes sense. Each time you auto attack, it's more impactful. It's a lot easier, if this makes sense, to like get CC'd or like get hit by abilities if you have Infinity Edge compared to these, because each time you are auto attacking, just the whole process is longer than if you have a shorter attack speed. So that is kind of why I don't love Infinity Edge. But with the right augments, this item is absolutely insane. Definitely one of the most broken, if not the most broken items. But without the augments, it's honestly more in the meh to bad tiers, just because attack speed is king in this mode. Next up, we have Navori Quick Blades, which gives you 55 attack damage, 20% critical strike chance, and 15 ability haste. And then you get two effects. Your first being your attacks reduce your non-ultimate ability cooldown by 15% of their remaining cooldown. And you get the fact that your abilities deal up to 20% increased damage based on critical strike chance. And again, it gives all of your legendary items 5 AD. It's really funny kind of how lazy the ADC items are. Like, they all have the same mythic passive, if you don't count Rageblade, if you just count the crit ones. And the effects of all of them are like kind of whatever, i.e. not even having an effect. It's just something I just wanted to point out really quickly. I think Navori Quick Blades, honestly, it floats between strong, decent, and augment dependent. I think it's kind of hard to like go for a good crit build because, again, you're going to have like no attack speed, so you don't really want to build Navori on a lot of like traditional ADCs, as again, you just want more attack speed so you can kite better in this mode, at least in my opinion. This item is absolutely bonkers on like Gangplank, as this lets his E, which can already crit with his like Q, crit even harder, because I do believe it stacks. But besides that, there's not like too many champions that come to mind that do want to build Navori Quick Blades instead of something better. I think it's like decent probably on someone like Tryndamere. I mean, I know it's good like on Xayah and all that, but again, like I talked about, they have their problems just because attack speed is just better. Because if you are getting CC'd or pinned down, then it is kind of hard to hit people. Oh, it's definitely good on like Lucian. If you don't get JG, you definitely want to go into Navori Quick Blades, as you can use your abilities more often. I'm going to end up putting it in augment dependent, because if you hit Jeweled Gauntlet, you're going to go IE. But if you don't hit Jeweled Gauntlet, you're probably going to end up going Navori Quick Blades on a lot of people, because like on the Xayahs, the Lucians, this is just better on them. I don't play too much ADC, so I don't have the most expertise on these items. My apologies. I will say though, I did play every single champion in Arena, some of them more than once, so I do have a decent sense about like champions that could use this item. Okay, I think I'm gonna put it in decent tier, just because the use cases are not anything too crazy. Like even in the case of Gangplank, you can one-shot people with it, but they could also just one-shot you, and it just, as it doesn't give you any survivability, and the cooldown reduction actually doesn't matter too much. It's good in like the early to mid game, but in the late game, if you don't one-shot someone with your abilities, you're not gonna get them back fast enough in most cases, so that's why I'm gonna keep it down here. It's definitely not bad, it's definitely decent, but it's nothing too crazy. Next up we have Triforce, which honestly went from an item everybody loved before like mythics were even a thing, as it felt like kind of the first mythic, as it always was pretty expensive. Usually it's like 3 gold or something like that, and it just gave you a ton of different things and it felt pretty nice. Nowadays it just gives you 30 attack damage, 33% attack speed, 200 health, 20 ability haste. I haven't built Triforce in honestly so long, ever since they added Divine Sunderer, which gives you sustain. Triforce has really fallen off the wayside, so I didn't even know it gave you attack speed. That's kind of funny. It gives you this effect called Threefold Strike, where your attacks grant 20 movement speed for 5 seconds. If the target is a champion or a structure, you gain 6% base attack damage for 5 seconds, which stacks up to 3 times, meaning you can get a max increase of 18% base AD, which is interesting because I was just about to say this could be really good with augments that give you just like flat AD or stuff like that, but you actually can't abuse that as it's just your base AD. And then you have Spellblade, like a Triforce effect. That's funny, I just said Triforce effect, like a Sheen effect, where after using an ability, your next attack is enhanced with an additional 200% base physical damage. So once again, you can't abuse the chance of getting a bunch of AD. Then it has a pretty cool mythic passive of giving you 3 AD, 3 ability haste, and 3 movement speed for all of your other legendary items. And honestly, this item, it's honestly kind of whatever. If you can build Triforce, you pretty much just want to go Eclipse instead in most instances, or Divine Sunderer. Triforce is pretty much a good item if you're playing like Fiora or Jax and the entire enemy team is just a bunch of squishies, as it does more damage than Divine Sunderer overall. But as soon as you see like one tank or bruiser, you definitely want to go Divine Sunderer because it just has better effects, like a better mythic passive of giving you a bit of pen, which matters, as Trinity Force you can struggle to kill them a bit more. So yeah, this is definitely an item you build against squishies. It's decent, but it doesn't really do anything too crazy. I'm gonna put it in the bad tier. I think it's okay on like certain ADCs like Ashe, like maybe even like a Draven from time to time, but there's very few games where I've seen someone build Triforce and I've been too scared of it. That's kind of like how Arena works, is if an item makes you terrified to play against it, then it's good, which Rageblade does, Eclipse does, this one does, this one does, this one does, and then everything below it, I'm not too scared when I see it. I'll put it in med tier. Nah, I'm gonna keep, yeah, I'll put it in med tier. It's honestly hovering around those two. It's just honestly all right, but there's very few games where Triforce really swings the course of a battle, which makes me just put it in med tier. Next up we have Stridebreaker, which gives you 50 attack damage, 20% attack speed, 300 health, and 20 ability haste. And then it has this active called Halting Slash, where you deal 175% of your base AD, once again not letting you abuse the amount of AD you can get. It also scales with 105% of your magic damage. No idea how they decided to give this item just 105% AP scaling. It's kind of funny seeing a number like this. It makes me think, like, is there ever a world where you're playing Veigar and like in the super duper late game you switch your mythic to Stridebreaker and you like flash on top of someone with 1000 AP and you do like what, 1050 damage when you activate this effect? That'd be pretty funny and something I almost want to try, But if you aren't having like a bunch of AP, which you won't have if you're building Strikebreaker, as it doesn't give you any AP, then it will just do the 175% base AD and slow them by 40% for 3 seconds. And this can be cast while moving. It also has this effect where when you deal physical damage, you grant yourself 20 movement speed for 3 seconds. And finally, the mythic passive of granting all other legendary items 2% movement speed. I think movement speed is a tiny bit of a fake stat in this mode. Ranged champions already have a lot more movement speed, so you really need dashes to catch up to them. Champions that don't have dashes are just going to struggle to catch up to them anyways, even if they have Strikebreaker. Because in normal League of Legends, you would build Strikebreaker because you do want a lot of movement speed, but a champion like Darius, even with Strikebreaker, will still be slower than the ranged champions, so there's just no point of going this item. There's also no minions for you to hit in order to proc your heroic gate, which is something you would normally do. You would like auto a minion, get the heroic gate effect, be able to run up to them. Here you can maybe like hit a power flower and then use that 20 movement speed to get a little bit closer. But I think ranged champions just have more base movement speed anyway, so that's not even really a strategy. I mean, this item is just bad, right? This item doesn't really do anything. It doesn't help you really kill squishies, as you still struggle to get on top of them. That 40% slow is kind of fake, because you kind of just hope that you can one-shot them anyways. It doesn't help you deal with tanks at all, as it doesn't do any percent max health damage. It gives you 0 sustain, so you can't like drain tank them. I don't really see a use case for Strikebreaker at any point. The only time it could maybe be good is if you have either the augment that lets you build multiple mythics, or the augment that lets you have lower CDR. Maybe then you could do a strategy with Strikebreaker. But if someone's building this, I'm chilling. I believe this is one of the only items I have yet to buy. I have not built Echoes of Helia either. I'll be fully transparent. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this item is insane. But I have played like 200 arena games, if you include PBE, on a bunch of different champions. And I have yet to see Strikebreaker, I believe. So I don't think that's the best way to gauge things. But I think in this case, the community has it pretty accurate, where Strikebreaker is a bit lackluster, as it's just better in the base game, helping you catch up to people getting picks for your team. But in this case, you can't really do anything after you get the pick, just because you'll be weaker than everybody else. Next up, we have Gore Drinker, which actually just got buffed in this patch. And now it gives you 55 attack damage instead of 50, 300 health instead of 200, which makes it equal to Strikebreaker in health. And it gives you 20 ability haste and 8% Omnivamp. And it has a very similar active, where you're dealing 175% base AD, plus 105% AP, again, to nearby enemies, as well as restoring 20% AD plus 12% AP, plus 8% missing health for each champion hit, reduced by ability haste. And I know this is a tangent, but if I were to play Veigar with that weird build, which I'm getting more and more tempted to do, I'd definitely build Gore Drinker instead, because you could get a pretty fat heal, potentially, maybe, if you had enough AP. Probably not. It's actually not too crazy, but definitely would be better. And then it has this mythic passive where you grant all other legendary items 50 health and 3 ability haste, which is way better than the Strikebreaker passive, which is just 2% movement speed. This item, like Strikebreaker, is just super underwhelming. I've built it on champions like Aatrox, and if you can pretty much build Gore Drinker, always build Eclipse instead. You just gain way more survivability with the shield. You have way more damage with the percent health damage on it, so you can actually deal with tanks. If anybody builds anti-heal, then the healing is absolutely nerfed a little bit for Gore Drinker, but the healing itself doesn't really matter. Again, a lot of this game mode is just either one-shot people, or avoid getting one-shotted, or getting just absolutely mowed down by a Rageblade champions. So Gore Drinker doesn't really have its place, which is sad, because when you first think of Arena, you would think Gore Drinker would be king. It's kind of like a fighting style item, but it just isn't buffed enough if you consider the arena buffs. The arena buffs are just way too powerful for Gore Drinker to keep up because, again, everybody just has way more health in this mode, like about 500 more or something like that. It scales with levels. It's hard to keep track of all of that. But this item just doesn't do enough damage to compensate for the other buffs. It's going to be put in terrible tier, especially before the buffs. I can now see it being bad because at least you do get 100 more health. But again, it just doesn't really do anything. It's fine in the early game, but Gore Drinker's really good in normal League of Legends, and by really good I mean it's alright, because you get a heal based on how many champions you hit. So if you're in a huge group of champions, you can get this huge heal, but this one you're only ever hitting 2 people, so the heal is nothing too special. It's just very underwhelming as an item, which makes me sad because I wish it was a lot better, as I think it's thematically very arena while just being weak. Next up we have Divine Sunderer, which gives you 35 attack damage, 200 health, and 20 ability haste. And you can pretty much tell when an item is strong right off the bat of how many stats it gives you, because 35 attack damage is way lower than Gore Drinker or Stridebreaker, and 200 health is also lower, but I would build this item a lot more than these 2 items. Now, the effect it also has is Spellblade, where after using an ability, your next attack is enhanced with an additional 160% base AD, plus either 4% of target max health as physical damage, or 2% if you are ranged. And the effect is a Sheen, so it's 1.5 seconds, which is very short. And if the target is a champion, also heal for 55% of the pre-mitigation damage. So that's pretty nice. I think you just heal way more with Divine Sunderer than with Stridebreaker, because Stridebreaker has a 15-second cooldown, but it can be lowered by ability haste. I should also say, when I was playing Aatrox with Gore Drinker, I got the augment where you get your item cooldowns lowered, and I thought, screw it, I'll try Gore Drinker. I could activate it a bunch of times, and it was true, I could activate it a bunch of times, and I could constantly get the effect that just does very little. That augment where you get lower cooldowns is just way better on Eclipse, just for future reference, because getting that extra 7% damage max health or that huge shield is just way better than getting 200 damage from Gore Drinker. But back to Divine Sunderer. Getting the 4% target max health physical damage is pretty nutty. It really helps you deal with mega tanks. It's still good against squishy people because, again, they just have way more health than normal. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Divine Sunderer. I'm gonna be putting it in the strong tier, and that's more because the champions that can use Divine Sunderer are strong than Divine Sunderer itself being that good. Sheen effect is nice. The fact that it's on a low cooldown is good. It isn't the best against killing squishies, which is why it is definitely below these 2. These 2 are transcending the meta. They are just so much better than all of these other items. Leander's Anguish and Moonstone used to be up there, but they got nerfed a lot more than these 2 items, so they are put down a little bit. But these items are still better than Divine Sunderer, but Divine Sunderer is no slouch for sure. It also has this Mythic passive, which grants all other legendary items 3% armor pen and 3% magic penetration, which further helps you kill those mega tanks, and is just nice in general. Definitely better than Triforce in almost every instance, unless you are playing against all squishies, as Triforce gives you that attack speed and I believe a bit more AD, as well as scaling AD when you hit people more often. I mean, if you've ever played against Divine Sunderer users, you know just how much sustain this item actually truly gives. It chooses champions that have no healing in their kit, like Jax, to making them feel like they actually have a bunch of healing, and that alone puts it in the strong tier. It's very good early to mid game, falls off a bit late game, but not enough for me to lower it at all. Next up, we have one of my personal favorites that I'm going to, fair warning, rate way too high, and that is Locket of the Iron Solari, and it gives you 400 health, 30 armor, 30 magic resistance, and 30 ability haste. all around, pretty decent stats, nothing too crazy. The 30 ability haste is rather nice. The 400 health is decent. It has its active, which grants nearby allies a 400 to 1000 shield, depending on your level, which decays over 5 seconds, and has a cooldown of 90 seconds, so you only get to proc it once per fight. But, like I always say, fights are so short in Arena anyways, that it doesn't really matter that it has a 90-second cooldown, because you're not gonna get a lot of Gale Force procs at 30 seconds, so this might as well have like an hour-long cooldown. Who cares? A lot of the actives, like, as long as they're not super duper short, like this one is 7 seconds, that's like around the range you'll actually see multiple procs, but anything longer than that 7-second range, you're probably only gonna activate once. So just keep that in mind. You don't need to be really scared of this 90-second cooldown. You're pretty much only gonna get one proc of most actives anyways. But they are buffing this item to a shield strength of 600 to 1200, which isn't too bad. A little 200 buff at all ranks. Then it also has this effect which grants nearby allied champions 3 armor and magic resistance. And then the mythic passive will increase the consecrate passive by 2 for every legendary item you have, which is a lot better, obviously, in normal League of Legends or, like, ARAM especially, as you are buffing 5 people instead of just 1, so you can pretty much just ignore these 2, which definitely hurts the item itself. But because the way Arena works right now, because the way I believe Arena works quite often, where it's either get one-shot or be one-shotted, but because of the way Arena works, where a lot of the game is like trying to avoid being one-shot while trying to one-shot others, I actually think Locket is a bit slept on. If you can reach like later points in the game, let's say level 16, the shield is 1000, because at level 18 it'll be 1200. A 1000 health shield is nothing to sneeze at. A huge weakness of Locket is if anybody builds Serpent's Fang, as it just cuts the shield down by 50%. So if the enemies are smart and see you have Locket and they end up building Serpent's Fang, you are screwed. Thankfully, most people aren't smart, so that's not something you actually have to worry about. But yeah, just like gaining a massive shield when you are playing an enchanter, it's not bad. If Moonstone didn't exist, it would definitely be Locket every time. If you are playing like a support that wants to help their carry survive, I honestly really think Locket is a bit slept on. I'm going to put it in augment dependent, but it's really like dependent on way more factors than just augments. The reason I'm going to put it in augment dependent though and not make like a new category is because A, I have too many categories, but this item is really good with Wisdom of Ages actually, as you reach higher points of the extra shield much faster because you are going to be higher level. So if you can get like that 1200 shield when you are normally only going to have like an 800 shield, it is pretty decent. It's like a whole other item of health you are giving to your teammate, which again is nothing to sneeze at. It's also not just like a big number shield to one person, it also gives it to your ally. So if you're going against something like Kennen, who does like a bunch of AoE, then Locket's strength goes up a lot more, as it can help you survive against that burst. I am talking about how great it is, but it definitely doesn't go any higher, and this is definitely the peak of its strength, because it doesn't really help you kill anybody. It doesn't give you the most sustain. They can just like wait out the shield. This is like pretty useless against tanks or bruisers. It's pretty much only good in that burst scenario. But when it does come to that situation, then Locket is definitely being slept on, and I haven't seen really many people build it outside of me. But when I do build it, especially with that Wisdom of Ages combo, I have not been disappointed by Locket at all. Another item that was heavily slept on by the community is Radiant Virtue, but apparently not as much as I thought, because Riot Games did decide that it does need a nerf. The health strength is going from 6% of maximum health to 4% of maximum health, which is a bit confusing to see, because the text of Radiant Virtue says that upon casting your ultimate, you transcend, which increases your max health by 12.5% for 9 seconds. And now I'm reading, here you can see, now I'm reading in these item nerfs that it's going from 6% to 4%. So does that mean that Radiant Virtue has always been just 6% and not this 12.5% or something like that? Yeah, I'm actually very confused by that now. Yeah, I actually don't know. I don't know what to say. I mean, I did do this. Yeah, I just looked at the other patch notes, which is like around when this was recorded, and I don't see any mention of Radiant Virtue. So I don't know if there's a typo in the patch notes or if there was a misleading description in Arena. Maybe that's why I thought the item is a lot more OP than it actually was, because increasing your max health by 12.5% when you already do get a bunch of health in this mode is pretty ridiculous. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little confused, but we'll carry on. But yeah, so I guess you just gain 4% max health now, which is a lot weak. It's definitely, something's wrong. Anyways, you gain some max health. We have no idea how much. Whatever it was nerfed by 2%. We can say that fairly confidently, probably. And the other part of it is that while you are Transcendent, you and your ally will heal for 25% of your max health over the duration. And then it has a mythic passive of granting all other legendary items 75 health. And because I didn't talk about it, the base stats are 350 health, 30 armor, 30 magic resistance, and 10 ability haste, which is nothing too crazy. But Radiant Virtue is your best bet for gaining a bunch of health, as it is one of the few items that gives you health on the mythic passive, if not the only one. Actually, I'm not sure about the other tank items. We'll see that in a bit. This item I used to have in Strawn. It could have honestly been OP if these items didn't exist, because I think it is just sneaky good on tanks. There's so many health augments like Celestial Body, like Goliath, where Radiant Virtue is even more nutty. Then the fact that you get the arena buff where you're just getting like an extra 500-ish health makes Radiant Virtue just a lot better. And again, something that I think has been heavily slept on. I might put it in augment dependent for its strength, because again, it doesn't really help you one-shot anybody. It just helps you and your ally not get one-shot, and it does it quite well. It's a lot better if you are playing like a tank plus bruiser combo, as it doesn't necessarily help them from getting one-shot. Also, because it's 9 seconds, don't feel bad to like use it a bit earlier in the fight than you might think, because you want that heal to be kicking in the whole time rather than using it way too late. This one is another good candidate for if you have the augment, which lowers your item cooldowns, as you can actually get 2 procs of Radiant Virtue if you also get the plants to lower your ultimate cooldown. So there's a lot of contingencies with this. But for a really long time, Radiant Virtue was definitely going under the radar. It's getting nerfed because of how strong it was. It's only one of 2 items that are getting nerfed, Eclipse being the only one. And it makes me happy because it makes me feel justified in always saying how OP I think Radiant Virtue was, while everybody else I didn't really see building it. They usually go for other mythics. But I thought this was the best tank mythic by far, and I still think it will be the best tank mythic. I know a lot of other people will say that Evan Shroud is the best tank support mythic. And yeah, honestly, it's not bad at all. It gives you 300 health, 30 armor, 30 magic resistance, and 10 ability haste. I think pretty much the same exact stats as Radiant Virtue. And then it has this effect where after immobilizing champions or being immobilized, it causes that target and all nearby enemy champions to take 20% increased damage. So pretty much Evan Shroud, you just hit 1 CC ability and the enemies are taking 20% increased damage. It's not bad. It's not bad at all. Going to put this in... I want to put this in decent tier, and honestly I want to put it in strong, but every time I look at the numbers of this item after a round, it just doesn't really impress me. It's always so hard to tell what's actually happening in the game. It's nice that we have any information from the items. 20% increased damage sounds like a lot, but they have to do it after you land your CC, so they kind of have to like wait to do their combo until you do land your CC, as they don't want any of their abilities on cooldown. One thing I don't like about Evan Shroud is it does nothing to actually help your damage dealer survive, which Radiant Virtue, Moonstone, and Locket do, as I think that's oftentimes more important. Just because your teammate can do more damage doesn't mean they actually get the opportunity to deal that more damage if they just get one shot themselves. because if you are building Evan Shroud, that means that you are going to be dealing almost 0 damage in most cases. You can do a little bit with Sunfire, and they'll just go on top of your carry and just try and CC and one-shot them instead. So that 20% increased damage just won't matter one bit, which is why I definitely feel merited putting it in just decent here. I think people kind of forget that you need to be alive to deal 20% increased damage. If there are no real threats on the enemy team to kill your carry, then of course Evan Shroud is absolutely insane, but that also kind of means that their team is just terrible. They're not that scary at all, so you could pretty much win building anything at that point. But it's still good. I just think that there are better options out there. Next up, we have a very confusing item in Jackshow, which gives you 300 health, 30 armor, 30 magic resistance, and 10 ability haste. And then it has this effect called Voidborn Resilience, where for each second in champion combat, you gain a stack granting 2 armor and magic resistance up to 8 stacks max, meaning you'll be gaining 16 armor and 16 magic resistance. And then at max stacks, you become empowered, instantly draining enemies around you for 7% bonus health plus 80 magic damage, which also heals you for the same amount, which is really good if you get a lot of health, which you can pretty easily in this game. And then it increases your bonus resistances by 20% until end of combat. And then the mythic passive is it grants all other legendary items 5 armor and 5 magic resistance. Honestly, this item sounds really good. And doing that 7% of your bonus health as damage to other people is pretty good. If you are like having that 10,000 health range, that would be dealing like 700 damage to enemies. The problem is a lot of people have sustain, so they'll actually heal back up that 700, and you only do it once. If you kept doing it, then it would be a lot better. Like, consider Eclipse, you're doing 7% of the enemy's health as magic damage, so in a way it's kind of similar to Jackshow. It's just that you're doing it to the tank, but this is on every 7 seconds, while this just happens once. So you are like kind of drain tanking them, but if you don't like kill them in that one instance, then they'll probably just out sustain you. I'm gonna put Jackshow in meh tier. I definitely have not explored this item too much, but I don't really see a reason to. And there's also a lot of armor and magic resistance shred in Rageblade and Divine Sunderer, which this item will just get less value because of all that shred. There's also all the augments that give you armor and magic resistance shred. And the people you're going to be most scared of as a tank are going to be people who are building Divine Sunderer and Rageblade. So you kind of lose out on the arms race if you want to think about it that way. If you're building Jackshow, you kind of want a different tank item like Radiant Virtue, which just gives you a bunch of health, which won't be as affected by the pen items as it's just raw health. And there's just more augments that scale with health than augments that scale with armor and magic resistance, as there are pretty much no augments that actually scale with those stats at all, which definitely makes the item a lot weaker in general. Then we have Iceborne Gauntlet, which gives you 400 health, 50 armor, and 10 ability haste. Then it has a Sheen effect, where after using an ability, your next attack is enhanced with an additional 100 base physical damage, and it creates a frost field for 2.5 seconds. Enemies that move across that field are going to be slowed, base if you're melee or ranged. So if you're melee, they're going to be slowed by 50%, plus a percentage of your health. And your primary target is crippled, which applies a 100% stronger slow on them, and reduces their damage by 10% against you for 2.5 seconds. It's funny, I've never actually read Iceborne's Gauntlet's effect because it's very visually clear that it slows people. I had no idea it reduces their damage to you by 10% for 2.5 seconds, which means if you can keep getting Iceborne Gauntlet procs off, they will just be permanently doing 10% less damage against you, which isn't bad at all. And then the Mythic passive, it grants all other legendary items 50 health, 5% tenacity, and 5% slow resistance, which isn't too bad. We already talked about with like Merc Tread boots, why tenacity and slow resistance isn't too crazy on tanks, because you really want to be the one who is taking the CC anyways, and you aren't really too scared of being CC'd in a lot of cases, because if your carry that you are playing alongside is not the one getting CC'd, hopefully they can do damage to make up for it. But it's still not bad anyways. Like if you get hit by a Morgana binding and you do have some more tenacity, then you can actually play the game, which is pretty nice. And the 50 health I do like in general. My biggest problem with Iceborne Gauntlet is because in Arena, you aren't playing against the same people over and over again. You are rotating around. This item is going to be really good against full AD teams and way weaker against AP teams because it just gives you 50 armor and no magic resistance. If you see a full AD lobby, then Iceborne Gauntlet becomes a lot more appealing. But that doesn't happen too often. There's a lot of people going like burn champions, which an item that gives you a lot of health is definitely going to struggle against. That's why I'm only going to put Iceborne Gauntlet in, honestly, the bad tier. It's just not very usable, sadly. I love this item. It's very fun, but because it only gives you one type of resistance, it's a very niche item automatically. And even if you are playing against full AD lobbies, it isn't great against any of the Rageblade users, as they'll just kite you to death, as it can be quite hard to actually auto-attack them, as they're just kiting away with all of their extra movement speed and all of their extra attack speed. So you really need an item that just gives you way more tankability, which something like Radiant Virtue actually does pretty well, as you can get a lot of health in this mode thanks to augments, and then Radiant Virtue can give you even more health, which is why I like an item like that compared to these two tank items, as they just fall a little bit short at keeping you actually feeling tanky. The final item we have in this whole journey of rating all the arena items is Heartsteel. And what Heartsteel does is it gives you 800 health, which is a lot of health, 200% base health regen, and 10 ability haste. It then has this effect where you charge up a powerful attack against a champion over 3 seconds while within 700 range of them. Charge attack deals 125 base plus 6% of your total health and bonus physical damage, and grants you 10% of that amount as permanent max health, and has a cooldown of 20 seconds per target. Then it has a mythic passive which grants all other legendary items 1% increased health and 6% champion size. This mythic honestly has the potential to easily be OP, but I think it's pretty augment dependent as well as enemy team comp dependent, because if you're playing against a bunch of ranged champions that can just kite you to death, then you won't be getting any Heartsteel procs. This item's actually just going to be way worse if you can't actually stay near them to get those procs off, as you do need to be able to auto them. But if you can get on top of them and you have a bunch of health, you can actually get to the point where you're almost one-shotting people. The two classic examples of this are Dr. Mundo and Cho'Gath. Cho'Gath with Heartsteel is absolutely insane and something that I think people should be exploring more, especially if you get to the Goliath or Celestial Body augments. The amount of damage you can do with just one auto is pretty ridiculous, but again, you just fall in that risk of just getting kited to death, or if you don't hit augments that help you with like extra health or stuff like that, which there are some augments that do that, but there aren't too many, then Heartsteel definitely feels a bit weaker because it's just harder to use than any of the augments above it. Another problem with Heartsteel is a lot of the users don't really have like any dashes or anything like that. They kind of have like minimal CC, so if you can like land that CC to then get on top of them to proc your Heartsteel, it is a lot better, but it is just kind of hard to do in general. And if you don't get them early game, you're just going to be a bit weaker because a lot of the strength of Heartsteel is the fact that it is stacking and stacking. So there's just a lot of things you have to consider with Heartsteel, which definitely makes it just a bit weaker. But if you can get the situation right, then this item is absolutely bonkers. And again, I have said this a lot, but it is one of my favorites for sure. Well, I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for watching this arena tier list, talking about all of the mythics. If you missed out the legendary or the starting items, boots, and juices, I'll have those in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to leave it a like and maybe consider subscribing, because the next video I will be doing will be finally the arena champion tier list, which has been a lot of work. I've put a lot of thought into it. The buffs have definitely changed several things, but I think it's going to be quite a fun video, so make sure to check out for that one. Once again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have good luck in the arena.